I'm going to start again. I begin today by acknowledging the Camaragal people, traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. This forum is being recorded. If you do not want to be recorded, feel free to turn off your video. There are 10 candidates in the seat of North Sydney. Every candidate was asked to attend this forum. We have apologies from William Burke, who is a North Sydney councillor and has a prior council engagement. Dajan Tink has also given his apologies, and today Robert Nalbandian advised he could no longer attend. We've been unable to track down the One Nation candidate, and they're not listed on the One Nation website. As I mentioned again, thank you to everyone for participating. And Kylea, we know that you're actually currently in isolation and due to COVID, and we hope that you that you recover quickly and that the symptoms aren't too bad. You look quite good. As I said, the order of speaking tonight will be Trent Zimmerman, Kylie Tink, Victor Klein, Lesley Kinney, Heather Armstrong, and Catherine Renshaw. Each candidate has 4 minutes. After the end of the candidate presentation, I'll put your questions to the candidates. Please put your questions in the chat. Please start them with the words questions for, and then insert the name as to who you want to talk to. And each participant can ask one question, and if we have time, we'll give people a chance to ask the second question. Please do not write anything in the chat that is offensive or derogatory or defamatory. You will be removed from the chat. Do not answer any questions on behalf of the candidate. Do not make any comments, just leave a question, because this makes it much easier for us to moderate. The number one rule for tonight is respect. Please do not make any personal attacks via the chat on a candidate or another person. Putting your hand up for public office is daunting at any time, and I respect everybody that puts their hands up for public office. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Trent Zimmerman, who is representing the Liberal Party. Hi, Trent.
Hi, Jackie, and thank you for having us tonight. And can I start by thanking you and in the Cove for the work that you do in our community. It's been an important way in which the community stay in touch, as everyone who follows the ITC chat would know. And it's really the modern way in which communities come together with the change, I have to say, in some of our local newspapers and the extent of local coverage that they can provide. Can I also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, in my case as well, the Camaragal people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. This is an important election, and for me, I come to this campaign as someone who's had the great honour of being able to serve our community as the member for North Sydney for the last 6 years. By way of background, I've lived in the North Sydney electorate for the last 20 years or so. And during that time, I've been deeply involved in the community that I love. That involvement well predates my candidacy for federal parliament. I had the opportunity to serve on North Sydney Council for 8 years and have been involved in a range of community organisations prior to parliament, including Rotary, of which I'm a very active member, my local school council, my local community centre board, one of our ex-service clubs, and more broadly, a health organisation, but also in a previous life as a member of an organisation which promoted the use of public transport globally and around Australia. And it's that experience which I've always sought to bring to federal parliament, and that involvement in our local community has allowed me to be a strong voice for the issues that we face as a community and the values and the views that our community has in federal parliament. For me, there are so many challenges and opportunities for our great nation, and I do think that those of us who are born here or made of our home here have joined a nation which does provide extraordinary opportunities when you compare ourselves to other countries around the world. But if I had to summarise it in 3 priorities, I think the 3 greatest challenges and opportunities that we have over the next parliamentary term are firstly, to make sure that we are managing the economic recovery from the worst shock that we've faced during what has been both a health and economic crisis over the last 2 years that most of us, not all of us, but most of us of my age would have experienced in our lifetimes. Secondly, I do think Australia and the global community face an extraordinary time, not seen since really the end of the Cold War, and that is the challenge that's being posed around the world to our democratic values. And Australia is and can play a leading role in defending those values. And of course, the tragic events in the Ukraine highlight the extraordinary threats that democracies face in the face of autocracies and authoritarian regimes, testing those things which we maybe took for granted after the end of the Cold War. And the third thing I'd say, which I think is a key challenge, is how we manage Australia's transition to a net zero economy. It's one of the things that I've been fighting for and was proud to be able to successfully help deliver our commitment to reach a net zero economy by 2050. And that provides an endpoint to a journey that we must go through if we're going to both meet our global opportunities, but also the opportunities that we have as a nation to export our wherewithal to the rest of the world. Can I finally say that locally, I'm proud of what we've been able to achieve. And at this election, I think I'm the only candidate that's put forward a properly costed program for the next parliamentary term. And that includes everything from better protection for our foreshores and bushland, through to an enhancement of women's sport, through to more support for local activities to support our transition to a net zero economy. So I'm proud of what I've been able to achieve, and I've enjoyed my service to the North Sydney community, and I hope that I'll be able to continue doing just that. I'm sorry, Jackie, I probably went over a little bit.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much. We didn't count the little bit where you were saying nice things about in the Cove.
That's a hint for other candidates. You get an extra 15 seconds.
Exactly. So our next speaker is Tink, who is an independent. Hi, Kylie.
Hi, and thank you so much, Jackie. As Trent said, thank you for pulling this forum together tonight, and to everyone for giving up the time to come along this evening. As Jackie said, my name is Kylea Tink, and I'm running as the independent in our federal election, which will take place on the 21st of May. I thought tonight, knowing that there are a number of people on here that I haven't yet had the chance to meet, it was probably important for me to provide you with some insight into who I am, why I'm doing this right now, and what it is that I'm hoping to be able to achieve for our electorate. So by way of background, North Sydney is my home. It's been my home for the last 15 years. I've built businesses and run businesses across the electorate, and I've raised my 3 children here. I have a 19-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 14-year-old who definitely keep me on my toes. I'm originally a country girl, though. I was born and bred in the town of Coonabarabran out in northwest New South Wales. And why that's important is because it fundamentally informs the way that I think about community, and that is as a place that where something is broken and it needs fixing, or somebody is in trouble and they need help. If it's within your capacity to do so, then those are the 2 things that you lean in and make sure happen. So that's something that's been central to who I am from the very youngest of my age right through until today. And it's been borne out in my professional background. You know, the reality is for 35 years, whether I've been working in a commercial entity or a not-for-profit or consulting, more often than not, I've been working to bring about positive social change across our country. So I've advocated for better access to medicines for people who were struggling with various health conditions. I was the inaugural CEO for a breast cancer charity called the McGrath Foundation. So the Sydney Pink Test is one of the things that I'm most proud of in terms of idea generation and community mobilisation. I was CEO for Camp Quality for a number of years, and most recently I've been working with vulnerable young Australians to help them get back up on their feet after they've had, you know, a tough time, whether that's at home or if they're having a tough time with their mental health. I also, with a group of friends, pulled together a campaign to lobby to get 766 children out of immigration detention centres back in 2014-15. So I've had a long-term commitment to human rights issues. So why politics and why now? The reality is, as I was working with the organisations that I was in the past 2 years and watching my own children grow up, it really hit me that young Australians were being asked to turn into a future where they were staring down not only an uncertain environment, but they were also staring down an uncertain economy and an uncertain society. And it didn't matter how good the programs were for the organisations that I was working with. We could pick these kids up and turn them to face back out, but ultimately the environment was letting them down. So I began to look at what was going on, and the position that I continued to come back to time and time again was that our federal political system was failing us, and in fact that the two-party system had become gridlocked. It's been nearly a decade since we've seen significant legislative reform here in Australia, and that's not to say that the people who go into politics but prior to me are bad people. They're certainly not. But the reality is that the system, as a two-party system, is no longer moving forward, as the parties are focused on winning or being sat in the loser's seat for a period of 3 years. I had that observation at the same time as a community group reached out to me called North Sydney's Independent, as my name had been mentioned to them, and they asked if I had ever considered entering politics. And 8 weeks after being asked that question, I said yes to running as the independent candidate for North Sydney. I did that because I believe we need to address 4 issues urgently, and they are faster action on climate, integrity in politics, the re-gearing of our economy so that it's forward focused, and addressing the fundamental inequity that we see across our country, whether that is in gender inequity, ageism, whether it's First Nations inequity, or the treatment of asylum seekers. So I've been campaigning now for 33 weeks, which has been incredible. It's nearly 8 months I've been able to spend getting out there, talking to people across our electorate. And what I hear consistently is that the people of North Sydney do want their voice to be heard in Canberra, their sincere and honest voice. And you do want your vote to count towards the things that matter to you, our electoral vote to count. And that's why, as North Sydney's Independent, it would be my great honour to go and be that voice and make sure that vote is cast in a way which is consistent with our community's ambitions and values. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kylie. Our next speaker is Victor Kline from TNL. Hi, Victor.
Hi, Jackie. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation, and thanks to everyone who's come along tonight. I would also like to acknowledge the land on which I'm speaking from and the traditional owners of that land, the Camaragal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So about 2.5 years ago, 3 friends and myself were sitting around doing what we often did, drinking red wine and bitching about the two-party system and how it was letting us down. And Catherine, one of those people, said, you know that old saying, somebody should do something about this? Oh, hang on, I am somebody. She said, well, we are somebody. And there was this epiphanal moment where we were all silent, but we knew what the others were thinking. We're old enough and ugly enough. We've been around the block often enough. Maybe we should do it. Maybe we should stop complaining and try and do it. So we formed what was then called the New Liberals. We're now known as TNL.
Sorry, Victor, could you just speak up a little bit? Some people are saying they're just having a bit of trouble.
Oh, okay.
That's a bit, yeah, just, yeah.
How's that? Probably that's I was a little too far away from the...
I think you were.
Yeah. How's that? Is that better? Yeah, good. So we must have, what was concerning us must have resonated with the rest of the community, because the party took off very quickly. And in 2.5 years, we have 3,000 members. We are running 9 candidates in the lower house in our first election and 8 senators. What we were concerned about when we were having that red wine session was a great number of things. Obviously, lack of action on climate change, corruption in government, 3.2 million people living below the poverty line, including hundreds of thousands of children sleeping rough on the street, refugees being thrown into dungeons for the rest of their lives or refooled to their death in their homeland, a degrading health and education system, and many, many more things. The party, I'm the leader of the party. I'm obviously the candidate for North Sydney. I've lived in this electorate now for 20 years. I had 4 years in North Cremorne and the last 16 in Crow's Nest, which I love, and I'm never going to move. It's a wonderful place. I'm a barrister by trade. I work exclusively, I'm editor of the Federal Court Reports and Federal Law Reports. In terms of practice, I work exclusively in the area of asylum seekers and refugees, and the lack of compassion shown by both sides of politics to refugees is one of the personal driving forces that caused me to become one of the founders of this party. I'm also the founder and director of the Refugee Law Project, which brings together barristers from Sydney and Melbourne. We have many fine barristers in this program, and also many fine law students from across Sydney and Melbourne who give their time free of charge to assist the barristers and, of course, learn a lot on the way. That's been going now for 5 years, and it's had significant success in terms of winning cases, but not so much in terms of getting visas for people, because the system is utilised in such a way that becomes very, very difficult. I'd like to really at this point acknowledge my friend and colleague, Professor Catherine Renshaw, who was instrumental in the setting up of the Refugee Law Project. She provided the law students for the first couple of cohorts, and also was deeply involved in the planning and was a great source of inspiration to myself. I guess as I said before, we're worried about many things. The key issues I would see for the North Sydney electorate are, of course, climate change, because that is a key issue for every electorate in every place in the world. Corruption and lack of integrity in government, because that affects the whole of the nation. Without honest political process, nothing else gets done. Education is a big problem, I think, for this electorate. We're about 2.5 high schools short. And we have plans to introduce, if we're ever fortunate enough to get into the position, a world-class education system along the lines of Finland, and use North Sydney as the pilot scheme. And on a very specific level, I think the Northern Beaches Tunnel is an ill-thought-out project and an environmental disaster. And we would be doing what we could to have federal funding removed from that so that it doesn't go ahead. So that's about it from me, Jackie.
Thank you, Victor, and sorry for interrupting you.
No, that's all right. No problem at all.
Our next speaker is Lesley Kinney from the Medical Options Party. Thank you, Lesley. You've got to just unmute.
Thank you, Jackie. Hello, everyone. So, why am I, a researcher, educator, performer, and artist, standing for election? I decided to run in this election through sheer outrage at government overreach and violation of freedom and human rights, forced and coerced medical procedures despite the science and statistics showing physical harm, with little to no efficacy, and the curtailment of bodily autonomy. The economic and psychological cost of lockdowns and the subsequent escalation of suicide rates in all age groups, including children. The censorship of truth in media and scientific and medical papers that went against the narrative, censorship of anyone who questioned the narrative, the suppression of drugs that are safer and better alternatives to the COVID injection. And then there was the unchecked and rapid rollout of 5G. Make no mistake, 5G has nothing to do with faster downloads and everything to do with surveillance and control. The upshot is that I felt compelled to do something about it. I simply had to make a stand. I chose IMOP, the Informed Medical Options Party, because their #1 policy is truth, transparency, and accountability. It's good to find a party with dignified humanitarian solutions regarding refugee intake and assimilation and consideration of Aboriginal rights and freedom. IMOP also has the best no 5G policy, and they have the country's best interests at heart. This election presents an opportunity to form a coalition of like-minded smaller parties rather than just the two-party dominated system. So I stand for freedom, freedom of choice, freedom of congregation, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, and the individual's right to bodily autonomy. Dropping the mandates is key. The impact on health and the economy has been devastating. No more lockdowns. Get businesses back on track, people back to work, teachers and children back in schools without the threat of masks or injections. Free up tourism and hospitality. Businesses wanting to start up again should have meaningful incentives. I would like to see full accountability for the mandates and full disclosure of the impact lockdowns, mask mandates and inoculations have had on the population. Mask and injection mandates need to be dropped from medical centres, aged care facilities, hospitals. This is a major deterrent for people having regular health checks and undergoing surgical procedures. People need to be able to see their sick and dying friends and relatives. Mask mandates on public transport must be dropped. The electorate has a thriving and usually well patronised public transport system, but mask mandates encourage people to commute with their cars, and this is unduly polluting and clogs the roads and parking availability. Keep the banks and ATMs open. People, particularly the elderly and disabled, need to be able to access and deposit cash. At the moment, for example, there are no banks in St Leonard's and only one free ATM. Post offices are already overwhelmed and understaffed, and the lockdowns exacerbated this with so much online shopping being delivered and picked up at post offices. Halt the rollout of 5G until it is proven safe and there is full and meaningful public consultation as to the impact it will have on privacy and individual freedom. I was Vice President of the No 5G Party from its inception and have spent the last 4 years researching not only the physical effects of EMF radiation, but also the subsequent far-reaching issues of mass surveillance and loss of privacy. It is the 5G rollout that enables such draconian measures as the QR code, facial recognition, vaccine passports, monitoring individual movements and actions, all of which obliterate privacy and lead to the threat of a social credit system and centralised digital control of our currency. I would like to—
Lesley, that's your time up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Heather Armstrong of the Greens.
Good evening, everybody. I would like to acknowledge the people of the Camaragal Nation and the fact that their land was never ceded, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Thank you all so much for attending tonight. This is a wonderful initiative. Fantastic to have such a huge number of people here meeting virtually. I am a former federal prosecutor with the Federal Commonwealth DPP for 26 years. Before that, I worked in law reform. Before that, for two big city firms. I have nonetheless had a long-standing and passionate commitment to sustainability and regeneration and to reducing greenhouse gases as far as possible in terms of my own particular life. I've had a long-standing practical involvement in sustainability and bush regeneration. My former husband and I renovated our then house in, his current house in Chippendale, which is the sustainable house and is open for inspection, and was a wonderful initiative at that time in 1996, which has really set a benchmark in terms of how to retrofit housing to make houses sustainable. So I'm also an inveterate tree planter, and I regenerate RMS land where I can find it to plant forests of trees, including at Huntley's Point. The reason I am standing in this election is primarily because I am so utterly appalled by the federal government's quality overall, by the complete mess they made of climate change, and by their denial of the reality we face, which is urgent and immediate. There is absolutely no argument. We must have no more coal or gas dug out of the ground. It's not debatable. If we do keep on digging coal and gas out of the ground and burning and selling it to overseas nations who also burn it, then we will not be able to stay below 1.5 degrees. This is a conclusion from the International Energy Agency. The International Panel on Climate Change has said loud and clear in its 6th and latest report that we must aim for 1.5 degrees and that 2 degrees is actually too high. We've already seen huge effects of disasters caused by climate change. We are affecting the most vulnerable people in the world and in our community, those living in floodplains, those living in bushland on the margins where there is no capacity to escape a raging inferno. People living in floodplains beside rivers where, once again, their houses are flooded and they've got to swim out of their windows at the level of the telegraph wires. I've seen Ballina and Lismore. I drove through them recently. It is tragic. Those people are suffering. Poor people in our community and worldwide are suffering because of climate change. There are huge issues of equality and fairness involved with our continuous destructive burning of fossil fuels. And the present government's denial of this and their insistence that we must keep on funding to the tune of $10 billion a year, subsidising coal and gas fossil fuel industries is truly appalling. The Beetaloo Basin, for example, has received enormous funding, grants, and it is going to threaten the viability of the Great Artesian Basin, which covers about a quarter of Australia, which is incredibly important for agriculture and for nature. If that's contaminated through fracking, then Australia is in real trouble. These industries are destructive. They've got to go. We are about creating a new economy, transferring and transitioning to a new economy. And we have the budget and the costed policies to do so. These policies have been fully examined in terms of their viability for funding. And we are going to fund it by imposing a tax on billionaires and by stopping big companies from paying no tax, by stopping the complete excavation of our natural resources free. We can't allow this to continue. We are just giving away natural resources to big foreign companies without benefiting Australians. We have other, of course, concerns. The Greens have a huge platform of policies which are difficult to get around and remember all of, but you can see them all on our website. Integrity in politics, the federal ICAC is the only way to stop this appalling pork barrelling from going on, from this unbelievable attitude that the politicians own our money. It's public money. It is not theirs to allocate to marginal seats or to those whom they regard as more likely to vote for them. You know, this money here for a pool, money there for a gym. Sorry, it's public money.
If you could wrap it up, Heather, that'd be great.
Okay, so we're about fairness, equality and compassion. Education, we want to restore educational funding, and also medical expenses. Mental and dental must be included in Medicare. They are two more big policies. We have many of them, but I must stop.
Thank you, Heather. And last but not least, and also last on the ballot paper, is Catherine Renshaw from the ALP. I'm sorry, Catherine, it was just a fluke.
Thank you, Jackie. I am a little bit used to being last now that I drew number 10 on the very long ballot paper for the House of Representatives, but that's okay. I'd like to first thank In the Cove for organising this forum. It's absolutely fantastic. And all of the people who've given up a rainy Monday night to sit here and listen to us discuss politics. I really appreciate your time. I have to say, since January, when I started campaigning, it's been the most fantastic thing of being a candidate is seeing the engaged local communities of this electorate who finally feel like they have a choice in who represents them. And the discussions and the debates that I've seen at the local level have just been fantastic. It's been very rewarding and a massive win for democracy. And just thank you to all my fellow candidates who now I can say just 2 weeks before the election, it's been the most wonderful discussion that we've been having for the people of North Sydney in a civilised, grown-up way. So thank you for that. And I'm here in Northbridge on Camaragal land, and I'd just like to acknowledge the Camaragal people. They're the traditional custodians of this land, and I pay my respect to them and their elders past and present. So I'm a professor of human rights law at Western Sydney University. I'm also a very proud local of this electorate. I was born into a small apartment in Waverton. I went to school in the heart of North Sydney, and I've raised my 3 kids here in Northbridge for the past 14 years. I've always felt that we were incredibly lucky to live where we do because of the amazing bushland that's around the cycleways, which I enjoy all the time, the waterways. We've got access to the best health facilities and educational facilities in the country, I think. And as a professor and a human rights lawyer, I've worked in countries all over the world, and that's made me all the more aware of just how precious what we have here is, and all the more desperate to defend it from what I see is 9 years of neglect. And it's those 9 years of neglect that made me decide to run for the Australian Labor Party in the seat of North Sydney. Because the things that I care most about, and the things that talking to my friends and neighbours and people across the electorate, they too care most about, are under threat under the current government. And I don't see as an alternative a crossbench of independence as the way forward for a better Australia. So the things that we need urgently to fix are large scale, and if we get it right, then we'll forge a future of absolute optimism for our children. So my fellow candidates have all raised the climate crisis, and that indeed is a crisis, and it's a massive economic opportunity that lies ahead. But the scale of work required to turn that challenge into an opportunity is huge. It involves work at all levels of government. And that involves a government of integrity as well. So part of the platform that I'm standing on is the establishment of a strong National Anti-Corruption Commission by Christmas if Labor is elected. Other things that matter to me a lot are aged care, and as a professor, I'm very concerned with education and equality in education. And it was so heartening to hear Tanya Plibersek yesterday say that equality for public school education is going to be a key priority for the Australian Labor Party. I'm very much looking forward to answering your questions in what I'm sure will be an amazing discussion a bit later. Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine. We have a lot of questions. So we'll start with one. It's simple to ask, may not be easy to answer. And what we'll do is I'll spread around who speaks first. But this is a question for all candidates. And the question is, assuming you're voting one for yourself, who are you personally voting for your number 2 vote? Trent.
We've got 1 minute, is that right to answer?
Oh, yeah, look, yes.
Okay. So my preferences have been published, and there are 10 candidates, but basically my second preference goes to the Lib Dems and my third preference goes to Sustainable Australia. At the other end of the spectrum, my last preference goes to Pauline Hanson Foundation.
Thank you. Kylie.
Yeah, look, it's a great question, isn't it? And I think it's one of the most amazing things about our democracy. So as an independent, I'm actually not instructing people on where to put their preferences because I think it's important we all have the freedom to make our own decisions. So at this stage, to be honest, I probably haven't decided where my 2, 3 or 4 will go personally, but I'm still very open and listening to what everybody has to say. Ultimately, I'm asking the people of North Sydney to give me your number 1 and then to put your 2, 3, 4 all the way through to 10 in whatever order you want to see your preferences flow, because that's your right as a citizen in this country.
Thank you. Victor?
Our How to Vote card is also published, and I would follow that, which means I would put Heather 2 and Catherine 3.
Thank you. Heather?
Yes, I would do the same as the How to Vote card. So Harley 2nd and Catherine 3rd.
Great. And last but not least again, Catherine.
Yeah, I have this problem as a teacher that I always answer questions directly. I don't do the politician shuffle around the actual answer. So I know that the very excellent question was about what I personally would vote. And that is that I would vote the Greens 2nd because our policies align with many of the socially progressive policies of the Greens. And Victor Kline has done, I just have to say, flat out extraordinary work for asylum seekers and refugees. And so he is next on my personal list.
Thank you. And Catherine, we might stay with you and ask you to answer the following question. This question is on environment, and it's for Trent, Kylie, Heather and Catherine. So starting with Catherine, given our current government's policy has us on track for 3 degrees Celsius of global warming, how do you propose to represent the voters of North Sydney who want serious action now to limit this to 1.5 Celsius?
Yes, so the most important part of the answer to that is that we need a 2030 target. So that's what we were told in Glasgow. Countries need to come back to COP27 this year with a 2030 target on reduction on 2005 level emissions. Now, Labor has that. Labor's target is 43%, which means 82% of our energy will be sourced in renewables by 2030. So that's the most important thing of limiting warming, is having that 2030 target. And that is what the Liberal National Party coalition does not have, and Labor does.
Sorry, I just realised that I forgot to ask Lesley about her preferences. So we might just quickly ask, so sorry.
That's okay. Yes, I've put Liberal Democrats second and One Nation third. One Nation because they are finally addressing 5G as a major issue.
Thank you. Sorry for that. Heather, if you can remember the question, do you need me to repeat it? Or
Yes, I've been reading all the chat. Yes, please. What was it?
Given our current government policies, how do you propose to represent the voices of North Sydney, voters of North Sydney who want serious action now to limit the 1.5 Celsius in respect of global warming?
We have to move to a regenerative economy. That means electrification. We have to stop mining coal, have to stop mining gas and coal, have to stop all those projects immediately. There's no negotiation about that. The economy must be electrified, and that means creating more renewable energy, which we can do in Australia. We're the best placed in the world to create renewable energy due to our abundant sunshine and to, of course, our wide landscape and our capacity to install wind farms. The creation of additional renewable energy can be used for the furtherance of green steel, green concrete, further building materials which are based on renewable energy, not based on coal fire. We can invest those renewable energy resources into transport. We must electrify the transport sector, which accounts for 1/3 of our emissions. We must invest in real carbon capture, not the stuff that is going on over in what the Chevron's doing at the Gorgon facility in Western Australia. But real carbon capture is trees, is vegetation, which locks in carbon until its cycle is completed. But we must continue to engage with the creation of renewable energies. We have a plan to transition mining industries into new jobs. We have a job for job guarantee. We don't propose to neglect and ignore the miners who have done wonderful service to Australia. We propose to include those people in the funding for a new manufacturing sector. And that new manufacturing sector will be based on renewable energy, not on dirty energy. So there's a transformation going on here. We're moving into a new...
That's great. That answers it. Thank you. Kylie.
Yeah, hi, and thanks. It is a great question, and arguably, I think, as everyone's acknowledged, it's probably the most pressing question for our generation and our community. We don't have another 3 years to wait for significant movement in this space, and that's why if I'm sent to Canberra as your independent representative, I'll be throwing my voice behind more ambitious carbon reduction targets for 2030. Specifically, I'll be putting our vote behind Zali Steggall's climate bills. Now, the reason those bills are so important and so effective is they're actually based on the legislative reform that took place in the UK in 2008. So the United Kingdom has over 14 years experience with that legislative framework now, and it's actually enabled them to already move to a position where they're 38% down on their carbon emissions, and they're actually targeting 68% by 2030. So number one, as the independent, I would be, as I said, backing the climate bills as tabled by Zali Steggall. Also, as an independent, I'll have the freedom to work with our local councils and our state members to work with everyone across our region to get North Sydney to be one of the first net zero urban energy zones. And the reason that's important is not only will it bring our cost of living down and reduce our own emissions immediately, it'll set an important example for the rest of the country to follow, because if North Sydney can get to net zero urban energy sooner than others, then there's no place in the country that won't be able to join us. And the third thing I just mentioned is that I've already committed that if elected, I will table a private members bill in the first 12 months to legislate the introduction of vehicle and fuel emissions standards and efficiency standards into Australia, because at the moment Australia is one of the only nations in the Western world that doesn't have vehicle fuel emissions and efficiency standards, and as a consequence we have some of the dirtiest vehicles running on the dirtiest petrol in the country, with vehicle emissions the third highest contributor to our emission standards. Something as simple as this is something that we can do really quickly in this country, and in fact our government's had the opportunity to do it for nigh on 8 years now. They've just chosen not to. So that's the power of an independent voice, and that's the capacity that the people of North Sydney would have in terms of driving specific legislative reform and discussion.
Thank you. Hi, Trent.
Thanks, Jackie. It's a really important question, and I'd say a couple of things. Firstly, I think that the key milestone is obviously getting to a net zero emissions economy, and we and the Labor Party, for perhaps the first time, got a bipartisan endpoint, which is to achieve that by 2050, and I think that is really important. In the short term, we have maintained the commitment we took to the last election of the 26 to 28%, but we're now projecting that we'll be able to reduce our emissions by 35%. And that's born out of the experience that we're seeing. Australia is deploying renewable energy, particularly solar and wind, at a faster rate per capita than virtually any other nation in the world. Today, almost 30%, over 30% of our energy is being generated from renewables. And in terms of where we move forward, we've already seen about a 20% reduction in our emissions over 2005 levels, but I'm someone that will always push for more ambition, because I think that we do have a responsibility to contribute to the global effort in as meaningful and positive way as we can. I see huge potential because we are seeing technology advance so fast. So, for example, Australia has not, primarily because of cost comparators with on-land wind, had an offshore wind industry. We're about to see that change. One project which we are helping to facilitate off Victoria will generate 20% of Victoria's energy needs. But we also have an opportunity to export that to the world, and that's really what we've got to do. We've got to make clean technology the default choice for not just Australians, which we're seeing already, but actually the rest of the world. Because, to be honest, while we see India saying net zero by 2070, China saying net zero by 2060, no reduction in emissions until 2030, in China's case, the largest contributor to emissions, it's going to be hard to achieve the global goals. So that's why we and other like-minded countries like the United States and Europe have to make low emissions technology the cheapest and most affordable for every country in the world to deploy to meet their energy needs.
Thank you, Trent. We're going to stay with you because the next question is for you and Catherine. Will either party conduct a wide-ranging review of our tax system to ensure we do not consign ourselves to an ongoing structural budget deficit position?
Who do you want to start?
You, Trent, thanks.
Thanks. Well, I don't know about a wide-ranging tax review, but lowering tax is an important priority for us. And I'm proud of the fact that, for example, for small and medium-sized businesses, we've been able to reduce tax rates from 30 to 25%. I'm really excited about something that I've been a strong proponent of, which a little bit technical, called a patent box, which gives discounted tax rates for IP developed and patented in Australia. Really important for driving innovation. And so far, we've included medical technology and clean energy in that scheme that we're introducing. And from personal income tax point of view, we've obviously got our three-stage plan, which will result in significantly lower personal income tax. We can do this because the Australian economy is so strong, and we want to do it because we believe that we should, at every opportunity, give Australians back the income that they've earned if we can do so. And we also look at reform in other areas. So, for example, we're trying to support small business through the measures that we had in the budget to provide for example, incentives for them tax incentives for them to support their staff in relation to training, but also digitalisation. These are all things that we can do to relieve cost of living pressures and tax burdens on Australians, while also promoting key areas like new technology and small business.
Thanks, Trent. Catherine, do you need me to repeat the question, or you're...
Thank you, Jackie. No, that's all right. So the $1 trillion of debt that we're bequeathing future generations of Australians absolutely appalls me, and it does make me very worried for my children and my grandchildren. The problem with the $1 trillion of debt that the Liberal National Party has left us with is that we have nothing to show for it other than a series of scandals, rorts and waste. And the Labor Party sees that as very problematic. So it's got a range of options to end that waste, including a review of outsourcing and consultancies that's got out of hand. And obviously a national anti-corruption commission will help with that as well. But the crackdown on tax avoidance for multinationals is a really important part of Labor's policy in relation to tax. In the precarious time of COVID, Labor has tried to be supportive of measures taken by the LNP to help the economy through this really delicate time.
Thanks, Catherine. So this is a question for Trent, Kylie and Catherine. And we'll start with Kylie. Do you agree that politics in Australia currently suffers from a lack of integrity and accountability? And what will you personally do to fix it? So, Kylie.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself and it wouldn't let me. Thanks, Jackie. Look, I think that it's very clear that Australians are very frustrated with the way that our parliamentary system has been behaving in particularly the last 6 years. The truth of it is we've never seen a period where there's been more ministerial discretion about how money is spent. We've never seen a period where the gag motion was used more often in the House of Reps to stop debate. And we've never seen such an amount of waste being put through in our budget. So we definitely need to bring integrity into our federal parliamentary level. I think for many people, myself including, when we've had backgrounds in the commercial sector for so many years, the truth of the matter is that a lot of the behaviour we've seen taking place in Canberra, particularly in the last 3 years, simply wouldn't be tolerated in the commercial environment, and people would have been dismissed or stood down. So as North Sydney's independent, I'll be supporting Helen Haynes's integrity bills. The amazing thing about that is that legislation is ready to go and has been ready to go for pretty much the entire term of the last government. And in fact, it would have gotten through on debate in the dying days of this government had the carpet not been pulled out from underneath it on a technicality for the number of people that were in the House. The great thing about Helen's legislation is that it's been widely reviewed and it's already widely supported. So I would be adding North Sydney's vote to supporting that rather than using North Sydney's vote to block it. I would also say that I would be adding North Sydney's voice to reforms around money in politics, so advocating for the real-time declaration of donations, a lowering of the cap in terms of what dollar amounts need to be declared, and then also advocating for truth in political advertising, because as I'm finding at the moment, there seems to be a fair bit of leeway in political speak, and I think just as we wouldn't allow that in the commercial space, I don't think we should enable misinformation to be spruiked in the political sphere as well.
Thank you, Kylie. Trent, what do you think about the lack of integrity and accountability?
Well, I think to start off with, I think our Westminster system has survived the test of time. I actually think that the system isn't broken, as people like Kylie would have you believe. And the proof is really in the pudding. I actually think that Australian democracy has, despite the few leadership challenges that both major parties have had over the last decade, has actually been one that's provided the stability that we've needed to create a country which is one of the world's most successful. And we should never forget the comparison, which is fractured parliaments that have impacted on the ability of those countries to really forge the stability that they need. So I think overall our political system works well, and it is something that I think overall we should be proud of. I think we are a proud democracy and have a lot to take credit for. Are there issues that need to be resolved? Yes, of course they are, and that's why I support an integrity commission being introduced at the federal level. We've got to get the model right. Each state has their own model. I think Helen Haynes' bill goes too far, because I think in any model, the fundamental principle has to be to protect the presumption of innocence and the right of people that might be investigated. And I think in New South Wales, for example, we've seen an overstepping of the mark and people's careers destroyed that were subsequently found to be people who committed no crimes. And our whole legal system is based around that fundamental premise that we protect the innocent. So that's why I think that, for example, we need to look carefully at the role of public hearings in an integrity commission, and, for example, maybe look at ensuring that we have the same evidentiary rules that you'd find in a court of law, or looking at public hearings being in extremis rather than the default option for an investigative body. But of course, we do have existing structures, everything from the Auditor General, from the Federal Police, from the Australian Building Corruption Commission, which unfortunately Labor wants to abolish, which is trying to avoid some of the problems that have plagued the construction industry, to Kylea, the body that investigates federal agencies. So there is an infrastructure there. I do think it can be enhanced by a federal integrity commission, and that's what I'm committed to see happen during the next term of Parliament.
Thank you. Catherine.
Thank you, Jackie. Yes, so we were up at the Diddy on Friday night with Mark Dreyfus, the Shadow Attorney General, and it was a little bit of a raucous night because it was a pre-Mother's Day get-together for many of the local mums. But anyway, over the top of the noise, he did manage to confirm that the Labor Party, if elected, would be establishing a National Anti-Corruption Commission by Christmas, and it would be a strong model, the type that's been referred to in the media as a model with teeth, which means the important things would be there. It would have the ability to conduct its own investigations on its own motion without having to ask the permission of a government member, which is what the model proposed by the Liberal Party had at its core, which is very, very problematic. It would be able to have public hearings, which is also, we know from the experience across the world, one of the core features of an anti-corruption commission that actually works. So I agree with Dominic Perrottet about the New South Wales model. It is a strong model, and it has done wonders to clear up what was a disgraceful mess in New South Wales. We know from studies that 82% of the Australian people favour the creation of a strong federal level anti-corruption commission. And Scott Morrison made the promise before the 2019 election that the Liberal Party would establish such a model, and just failed to do it. So it is a flat out broken promise. And it's one of the reasons why if I were a voter in this electorate, it would be very, very difficult for me to think about returning the Liberal Party to government. So given that broken promise about such a key institution that we know so many Australians want, it's really no wonder that trust in politics is suffering right now. But I mean, the institutional architecture, which we like as lawyers, is just one thing. The other thing we need to restore trust is just better people in politics. So I really actually applaud people like Kylea, who have come from a background that's not politics, standing up to be counted in local political arenas. I think that it does engage and energize people in a way that, no offense, Trent, we don't with people who have just come straight through a traditional political pathway. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Catherine. The next question is for everybody. So I'm going to get Victor to start. But the question is, I'm concerned about the two major parties protecting their own power. In particular, the lack of transparency as it relates to FOI requests. Scott Morrison's office met freedom of information deadlines in just 7.5%. As our reps, would you support properly funding the public service to answer FOI in a timely manner? Sorry, Victor, can you just hit your space button? Yep.
Yes, I would. I think
Yep.
the FOI was once a glorious cornerstone of our democracy, and it's now disappeared from any functionality at all. So I'd be strongly in support of that. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Lesley? You just hit your space bar, Lesley. That's it. Lesley, can you just hit your space bar?
IMOP stands for Truth, Transparency and Accountability in government, science, medicine and media. And definitely, as far as the government is concerned, FOIs need to be answered in a timely manner, and they need not to be blocked, which they often are, according to what the current government narrative is. It's one of our main policies.
Thank you, Lesley. Heather? Sorry, can you hit your space bar? We'll come back to Heather. Catherine?
Oh, I just have to agree with most of the panelists on this. I think it's a fundamental part of citizen empowerment is the right to see government documents and to, request government documents and to not have barriers thrown up in our way when we ask for transparent governance. It's a fundamental right, the information that underpins decisions, particularly decisions made about us and our families. So they definitely should be responded to in a timely way. It's important for accountability, and I would be supportive of that for sure.
Great. Okay, Heather, we can hear you now.
Sorry. Yeah, well, dealing with the latter part of the question first about the public service and having sufficient public servants to deal with FOI requests, there has been an appalling hollowing out of the public service across all sectors of the federal government. The attitude seems to be that we just contract out the services of government. We don't have public servants. So there are grossly insufficient numbers of public servants in general to manage our country. And this is a disgrace. We need to stop this privatisation of government policy and government management. So FOI, of course, is a fundamental bulwark of democracy. We must know what governments are up to. One of the major excuses they use is categorising documents as commercial in confidence. Now, this is just a complete furphy because most of those documents are not commercial in confidence. They are decisions made in the course of deciding whether a project is going ahead or not, usually put up by a consultant. Those sorts of attempts to conceal government decision-making just makes us distrust government. It's been a fundamental cause of a lack of trust in what's going on federally and at state level too. The GIPA legislation at state level is just as badly abused. This is really a serious problem. We must have fundamental transparency in government, and it has been really just trashed.
Thank you. And I am the Queen of GIPAs, by the way. Trent.
Yep. I think I'm muted. Yep. I haven't seen those figures before that were referred to in the question, but as a matter of principle, I would say yes. And I do think FOI laws are very important to the transparency of government, but I haven't seen those specific figures quoted before. But yeah, as a matter of principle, I do strongly agree that the public service should be reported to respond to them. And Jackie, if you're so kind, don't throw the next question to me because I've got a. I think the technical term is to see a man about a horse. So I'll be back in 2 ticks.
Okay. Kylea. Whoops.
Am I on mute? Yeah. Yeah, look, I think what we're hearing is a resounding chorus that we all agree that freedom, access to and freedom of information is fundamental to our democracy. I guess I would just like to echo what we heard Heather say. There has been a complete hollowing out of our public service over the course of the last 9 years, and that is to the detriment of our country. You know, the fundamentals of our democracy are such that we have a political system that was for many years supported by a strong public service, and then we had a media environment that enabled us to have freedom, you know, of reporting and independent opinion. In the absence of a diverse media environment and with the creation of a hollowed out public service, what we've ended up with is a government that is seen fit to move in whichever direction it wanted, whenever it wanted. And I feel bad saying this because I know Trent's not on the call, but as I said before, the reality is we've never seen as much ministerial discretion in terms of budget expenditure as we have under this government in the last 3 years. And actually the statistic that Trent doesn't have to his fingertips is that this government has actually declared more information commercially confident and parliamentary privilege than any other government before its time. So there's a desperate need for us to bring transparency back to our government, and I think that is where I think a strong crossbench can actually call those questions out and ask them of both major parties, regardless of who's in power going forward.
Thank you. Our next question is on the cost of living, and we've got 2 questions. And basically, people want to know from every candidate, what would you do to manage the cost of living in this inflationary environment, particularly regarding large issues like housing? And another question actually said, you know, young Australians struggle with home ownership, cost of living and other financial issues. How will you help them? So how are we going to get this cost of living affordable? And let's start with Heather.
Housing is a disgrace in Australia. We have no there's no federal housing policy in Australia. In Australia, we have a waiting list for social and affordable housing of more than 50,000 people who've been waiting for more than 10 years. What the Greens will do is to allocate billions of dollars towards a social housing fund, which will be used to construct housing. There has been no construction. The only available money has been for maintenance, and even that is falling down. The reason why there's no construction is because the way to reduce housing costs, real estate, is to create more supply, social housing, affordable housing. What that does is to take the demand out of the pressure system that is the economy regarding housing. We must create more supply. Social and affordable housing is necessary to look after these weak, vulnerable people who are looking for shelter. Housing is a universal right, and Australians have just been neglected for far too long, as if they don't exist. People living rough for years. It's really a disgrace. So we must have a federal housing policy. We must invest in social housing.
Thanks, Heather. That's great. Sorry, we've got so many questions. I'm trying to keep us all on track.
There's so much to say, yeah.
Victor.
Thanks, Jackie. In terms of goods and services, our manufacturing capacity has now dropped to 82nd in the world. We're below Rhodesia and Gabon. So when we get hit with something like COVID and the supply lines are stretched because we can't even make things like masks in Australia, then there is a shortage of goods. And the old laws of supply and demand push the price of that up. And that's how we get inflation in a time where we have also 3.2 million people below the poverty line. So the worst of both worlds. We would invest strongly as a government in Australian manufacturing and broaden it out and stop just digging holes and pumping up a housing bubble. Now, as far as the housing bubble is concerned, people talk a lot about the $1 trillion government debt. For a sovereign government, that's, believe it or not such a big deal. As Professor Bill Mitchell said, a sovereign government could pay that off with one stroke of the keypad. What matters is the private debt, which is 6 times higher than the public debt, and 90% of that is in housing. Now, we have a policy for affordable housing produced by world-renowned economist Professor Stephen Kline, who's our senior policy advisor on economics. And I sincerely hope that if I'm fortunate enough to get in, I'll be able to convince whoever is in government to adopt this policy, because I'm telling you, it's wonderful and it's new, and it will be picked up by Finland and Norway for sure. So let's get in first and do it.
Thanks, Victor. Kylie.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, look, and this is at the heart of everything that we're experiencing in the federal seat of North Sydney. House prices that are rising exponentially, petrol prices that are rising exponentially, costs of milk and bread. Everything is going up except wages at the moment in our current environment, and that is a huge problem. I think from my perspective, there's a couple of things I want to say. First and foremost, oftentimes in this space, just throwing money at something is not the answer. And in fact, throwing money at something in the short term can create a much larger problem in the longer term. So whether it's we're shortchanging our own budget, as we've seen recently with the reduction of the fuel excise by the current government, or, whether we're looking for quick get out of jail card, policies which see people take on an enormous amount of debt that they potentially don't have the capacity to service. I wish there was a simple answer, and I don't think there is. And I think we need to embrace that as a country to be able to move forward. I do agree with Victor that onshore manufacturing, sovereign manufacturing is a really important part of us re-establishing ourselves as a nation and enabling ourselves to move our economy forward, but also to defend ourselves in the case of threat. I would also argue that moving ourselves to a renewable and sustainable energy future as quickly as we can is really important, because the fact of the matter is solar renewable energy is getting cheaper every day. And in fact, there are times during the day at the moment where energy is being produced and it's costing negative to generate because we can get there so quickly. And obviously the introduction of the private members bill to bring in, more efficient vehicles will also COVID brain, will also result in people saving money as we use less petrol. In fact, when the Productivity Commission looked at this in 2018 and recommended it to the federal government, their finding was if the federal government had introduced fuel and vehicle efficiency standards, then every vehicle owner in the country would have saved $500 in the year that came. Yeah. So that's, that's just, yeah, there you go, Jackie.
Lesley.
There's the unmute, got it. I think as far as rents go and home ownership costs, one thing that would really help this is to limit the foreign ownership of land in this country. I do know of several cases where foreign investors are just parking their money on Australian homes and leaving them empty, and that creates an issue for rising costs of homes and rents. And I do know of people who have enough money to buy a home in a specific area, but they're outbid by foreign investors. And I think that's pushing the prices up considerably. I also think that there are a lot of things we can do to improve our economy, though. For example, we could introduce an Australian-controlled gold-backed currency. Australia has a lot of gold. What happens to it? If we keep the banks and ATMs open and cash in circulation, that will help a lot of poorer people. A lot of Aboriginal and other welfare recipients are forced to use the Indue cashless card, and they're limited with what they can buy. For example, in the Northern Territory, in a riverside community, it's $9.20 for 2 litres of milk. And they at the only outlet that they can use their Indue cashless card at. So, a few things like this. I think that the government needs to stop paying exorbitant amounts to pharmaceutical companies and absolutely bring back Australian manufacturing and support family-operated farms.
Thank you, Lesley.
And charge realistic prices for our natural resources and exports.
Thank you, Lesley. And last but not least, again, Catherine, if you remember the question.
Thank you, Jackie. No, I remember the question because it's actually been one of the most heartbreaking things about campaigning in the electorate is listening to the stories of younger and older Australians who are really, really doing it tough right now because of the cost of living. It has been very upsetting to hear stories about young couples who are delaying having children or waiting to have another child until the first child starts school because of the cost of childcare. And older Australians who have said to me in Lane Cove Plaza, you know, I used to take my kids to the movies my grandkids to the movies once a month, and now I'm not able to do that. So this is absolutely an issue. And I mean, we're known as a well-off electorate, but this is certainly an issue for people in our electorate as well. And there is no easy answer to that, but Labor is staring the problem right in the face with a range of measures that are designed to ease the burden on families, on older Australians, on younger Australians who are trying to have secure work and to get a foothold in the property market. So a big thing is childcare, for example. When I first went back to work after having my second kid 20 odd years ago, it was the case that I went backwards if I decided to work a fourth day. And it's just shocking to me that that is still the case today. And Labor's childcare policy directly addresses that by removing the cap on childcare rebates and by making it cheaper for 97% of families to access childcare, which I think will have a tangible effect on people's ability to get ahead right now. And housing is an issue as well. And I mean, Heather was right in saying that there's not a quick fix, but a certain start are the 20,000 social housing projects that Labor is going to pursue if it's elected to office. And also the plan to make it easier for people to buy a first home by the Help to Buy scheme that Labor has, where the federal government will provide some of the equity in people's first home. They're tangible, real answers to cost of living and housing pressures. As Kylea said, it is true that the cost of electricity is something that people are faced with, and that Labor's plan for emission reduction of 43% by 2030 will mean a saving per year of $275 for every small business and every household. And that is not nothing as well. So all
Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah.
Trent.
Thank you. And look, obviously cost of living pressures are real, and particularly as we've seen what hopefully will be short-term inflationary impacts, particularly generated by what's happening overseas, and that's directly impacted on the costs of fuel, and that's flowed through to a whole range of sectors in the economy. But it is a real issue, and that's why the last budget had a particular focus on things like reducing the fuel excise, which I think is important. A lot of motorists around Australia are suffering under the cost of petrol, but also in areas like reducing the cost of medications and providing support through the low income and middle income tax offset and support for those on social security. So they're all very tangible and positive measures that we've taken. Housing affordability, look, it's you get 5 million views on how you can address this issue. Partly it is supply, partly it is things that are in the hands of the state government in that regard. We've been focusing very much on providing greater support and for people entering the market, particularly on low and middle incomes. And we have seen, I think from memory, 150,000 new home buyers into the market in the last 12 months compared to half of that before we came to government. But it is obviously in our area particularly substantial. And I'm not quite sure what the answer is to that for people in our community in a simplistic way. I think it's going to be multifaceted. And then finally, I just want to touch on this narrative which Victor introduced, which might have been a little bit off tangent about manufacturing in Australia. I'm surprised that Victor thinks that Gabon is the role model for where Australia should be, but we do need modern and smart manufacturing, and that's why we've got a modern manufacturing plan. That's why we're investing in things like establishing our own mRNA facilities. That's why we're doing things like the patent box, which I talked about earlier on, to get IP here. But Australia has changed. We're not going to be Fortress Australia or a manufacturing nation like we were in the 1950s. We're not going to be a country like Gabon, which has sweatshop labour rates. We're going to be a country that primarily is service focused, that's using our smarts, but we also need smarter high technology manufacturing here, and that should be our focus. but we can't go back to where we were 50 or 60 or 70 years ago. The world has changed, we've changed, and I think in many ways we're using our intellectual capacity far more than we did in the 50s or 60s, and that's a good thing.
Thanks, Trent. We've only got 10 minutes left and we've got so many questions, so if we can keep to really quick answers, that'd be great. So the next one is for everybody, and I'll start with Catherine and we'll go backwards. Catherine, Medicare rebates have failed to keep up with the true cost of medical costs. People are facing increased out-of-pocket costs at the time when they're also faced with other cost of living. What is your plan about the Medicare rebate, making it a bit more, and also dental? People want to know about dental as well.
Yeah, so Medicare is a proud Labor initiative. It's one of the things that a majority government can do, create large social good policies like this that serve the country for decades and decades to come. So Labor has committed to protecting Medicare and to not pursuing any of the cuts that have been threatened or implied by the Liberal Party. I mean, it was a Labor government that agreed that dental care for children should be part of Medicare, and we supported that and thought that that was an important part of child health. I know that the Greens have got an ambitious dental policy, bringing dental care for adults within Medicare, and that's something that as a human rights person who's interested in the right to health, I see very favourably as well. At present, it's not Labor Party policy, but if the budget permitted some time in the future, then I would stand, behind such a policy for sure.
Thank you. Heather.
Yes. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Oh, good. One of the problems with getting adequate mental and dental care is the cost of it. It has to be included in Medicare. It must be a rebatable expense within Medicare, because young people in particular are suffering. They cannot afford to see psychologists and psychiatrists. All these young people with ADHD, with anxiety and depression, suicidal ideation, these children need our help, and they must be able to access mental services. Dental health is so fundamental to overall human health. People can have very serious conditions, heart conditions resulting from failure to deal with dental facilities, dental health. So those are fundamental changes which must be included in the budget. The need to increase the Medicare rebate for GPs is something that I think the Greens would aspire to. The only way to get people to actually work as GPs, and we have such a shortage of them, is to make GP businesses more profitable. We have to stop giving billions of dollars away to private health organisations, private companies, and start pushing that money back into Medicare. The privatisation of our public health facilities and pushing all those billions of dollars into those private companies must stop. And that saving will allow us to then invest more in Medicare, which will of course enable us to increase the Medicare rebate so as to allow us to get GPs out into country and remote areas where people are dying for the lack of them. So this is a serious problem and must be addressed.
Thank you. Victor.
Thanks. Our policy is free cradle to grave healthcare, including dental. And rather than seeing that as a cost, we would say that the investment required to create that would be a massive stimulus for the economy. That would be our approach. If we could just take 1 second to, I think, unfortunately, I misled Trent with what I was saying. When I said, when I mentioned Gabon, I was mentioning Gabon because they are 81st in the world in manufacturing capacity. I wasn't praising Gabon, I was saying they are terrible, but we are 82. That was the point I was making. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for clarifying that. Trent.
Firstly, I apologise if I verbaled Victor, but I do come back to my point, though. I think that our economy has changed in relation to where we want to focus our manufacturing. We want it to be smart manufacturing. On the Medicare question, it's an area to take a strong interest in as chair of the Parliament's Health Committee, and I've been proud of our work to support the health system, particularly those with rare diseases. We've had a review looking at the Medicare schedule for some time, and that's resulted in rebates for some, but certainly not all, for some scheduled items increasing. It's one of the great challenges because health expenditure could be a bottomless pit. I'm proud of the fact that our support for Medicare is increasing substantially, has increased substantially, and of course we put in place legislation to guarantee Medicare's future, and that's reflected in the fact that we're seeing bulk billing rates, i.e. those basically getting free consultations at the highest levels they've ever been. And I should also add that obviously during the pandemic, our investment in health has increased dramatically locally. Funding for our local hospitals, including Royal North Shores, increased by 85% while we've been in office. And the PBS, a very important element, has supported 2,900 new drugs, and these are making things more affordable and many benefiting directly residents in our area. And finally, obviously, we've seen the expansion of things like telehealth, more consultations for mental health, and they're all been quite important for people as well in terms of the future.
Thank you. Kylie.
You're not forgetting Lesley again, are you, Jackie?
No, I won't.
Look, I actually, just reflecting on that, I do want to pass my thanks on to Trent, because I know as our federal member, he has been very actively involved in the parliamentary subcommittee on health. So, and I know that that parliamentary subcommittee has done a lot of good work in the last 3 years. I think what's interesting is it's a lot, unfortunately, it's quite akin to a lot of the other work that's been done across this parliament, in that there's quite frequently, it's not that we don't have the answers, it's that we haven't had the political will to be able to move forward really quickly in terms of the things that need to be done. So the reality is the expense of the PBS in real terms hasn't been growing here in Australia. It is, you know, pretty much on par with what it has been along. And what we do see with the Medicare review that Trent talks about, that was about what's listed and what's not, and where do we need to go going forward. You know, Australia has had a long history in being involved with things like sympathetic access schemes on clinical trials. Our participation in those have started to fall off because we've basically lost our pharmaceutical manufacturing sector here onshore. It's all been offshored. So I think there are many areas in this that need to be addressed, and it probably sounds like a cop-out, but there's not a single answer to this question other than to say that I think all the candidates to date have reiterated that, you know, and I agree with them, Medicare is essential to the nature of our nation, provides important support for families and people of all ages, and it is important that we continue to be open and looking at how we can improve it and expand it as and when the opportunity allows.
Thank you. And Lesley. There you go. That's it, Lesley.
Finally, it just keeps going back on. Yes, look, I absolutely would support a public dental scheme where people can get rebates for dental work. So many people put it off, partly because they're a fear of the dentist, I know, but it's mainly the cost that puts people off. It definitely should be included in Medicare. I think I go along with some of what Heather was saying, that we need to funnel a lot of the money that goes into the private health system back into the public Medicare system, so that there is enough money to cover what we need to cover. Definitely GPs need to get the proper rebate that, or the proper payment, so that people can then get the proper rebate for seeing GPs. Absolutely. And other services too, of course. So Medicare is absolutely essential in Australia for most people.
Thank you, Lesley. Now, we did want to finish at 9 p.m, but there are two issues that people have asked a lot of questions. I know, Victor, that you've got to go, so if I can just ask you this first. And basically the two questions that I'd like to finish off on, one's on the religious discrimination and one's on gender segregated schools. But this is a question for all the panel. Why do you or why don't you support the religious discrimination bill? So Victor, if we could start with you. That's it.
I don't support the religious discrimination bill. As a party, we don't have a policy. It would be a free vote if it ever came to that. I don't support it because it gives institutions the ability to discriminate against people and to discriminate against them on, in my respectful view, completely invalid grounds like their sexuality.
Thank you. And your stance on gender segregated schools?
I think this is something that shouldn't be imposed, but I think it should be available if parents want it.
Right. Okay. So thank you, Victor. So just going back to Kylie, do you support the religious discrimination bill? And if so, why or why not?
Yeah, no, I don't support it, and I do believe that we need to have protections for the freedom of religious expression, but this piece of legislation in its current form just has definitions that are far too broad and puts too many vulnerable people at risk. So I was very glad to see the bill withdrawn by the Prime Minister in the last sitting of the House. I note that the amendments that were passed in relation to it were actually amendments that were put forward by somebody from the crossbench. Rebecca Sharkey moved those amendments, which enabled people like Trent to cross the floor, which was great to see. But the reality is that those bills do us an injustice as a nation. I do believe fundamentally in human rights, and I do actually believe that Australia would be best served with the creation of a Bill of Rights in the longer term. But importantly, whenever you look at one human right, you can't elevate one over the top of another. And that's what that religious discrimination bill did. What was the gender segregation question? Sorry, Jackie, I didn't see it in the chat.
Oh, it was specifically for Victor.
Oh, okay, that's it. Yeah, so no, I would, and I've got to say, consistently, from what I hear of the people of North Sydney, they don't support the religious discrimination bill, and I think it is disappointing to hear our Prime Minister say that he will introduce that back into the House.
Thanks. Who are we going with next? Oh, Catherine.
Yes. Thank you, Jackie. It was shocking and bewildering to see the current Prime Minister use the dying days of this Parliament to introduce such a divisive and controversial and flawed piece of legislation as the Religious Discrimination Bill. I believe that people have a right to freedom of religious expression, and faith communities in Australia have asked for that to be protected, like gender and race is protected. But the current form of the bill is absolutely inappropriate and does unjustifiable harm to students and potentially to teachers as well. So I was very proud but not surprised that Labor would oppose the bill.
Okay, Heather.
The fact that it is lawful to sack somebody because of their sexual identification is really disgraceful. That's allowable at present. That kind of discrimination has no place in modern Australia. The other attempt to allow certain statements not to be excluded from the religious discrimination bill, so that people have a right to make basically discriminatory statements. The Israel Folau example comes to mind, is disgraceful as well. The bill should not pass. We should protect equal rights in Australia, and there should be absolutely no attempt to vilify or demonise any individuals on the basis of their gender identification, and in particular transgender people who are really copping it at the moment, no justifiable reason, and I regard that as a disgrace in a public discourse.
Thank you so much. Lesley.
Yes, I would not support this bill at all. I think that really I don't like the idea of state interference in religious preferences anyway. IMOP doesn't have a policy around religion, and so I would not support. I really don't see why there should be this bill at all, but certainly not in its current form. If they can make it more acceptable to a wide range of religious preferences and so on, then yes, maybe, but I think really it's not, to me, it just doesn't seem to be a matter for the state.
Thank you, Lesley. And Trent.
Thanks, Jackie. Look, and I'm pleased to answer this because I'm particularly aware that the Australian Christian Lobby is very active at the moment in ringing letterboxing and social people about my views on this. And I want to make that what my views are very clear. Firstly, basic principles. I do support legislation that would prevent religious discrimination. It's an international obligation. It's a no-brainer to me that you shouldn't allow to be discriminated against based on your faith. And my view is that we should have legislation that mirrors the orthodox discrimination laws that we have in relation to age and sex and racism. What I don't support and why I crossed the floor is where our bill went well beyond the orthodox discrimination laws that we have. And I also supported, obviously, amendments to the Sex Discrimination Act to remove discrimination against students and also teachers. Frankly, I was disappointed that the Labor Party supported the amendments on students, but not in relation to teachers. But that's my view, and my view has not changed. And if I was still in Parliament on May 22, that's how I would vote if this was reintroduced.
Thank you, Trent. We're going to wrap it up, and I can see poor Kylea must be starting to fade with COVID. And on that, one particular question I just want to finish off on, and this is from someone who sadly lost a loved one to COVID. They have asked, would you commit to an independent inquiry or royal commission into Australia's handling of the pandemic? And I'll start with you, Kylea, and then you can leave because you do look like you are fading.
Oops. That's a yes from me. In fact, in the policy positions, I've argued that we should be doing an immediate interim review on how COVID has been handled in Australia, and then pursue the Royal Commission in the longer term, because obviously Royal Commissions take quite a degree of time. It concerns me that we're actually not stopping and learning and changing the way we work as we move forward as a country. And, you know, the fact of the matter is 5,000 people have actually lost their lives to COVID this year already. And yet it's not being reported anymore, and we've essentially gone back to business as usual. I think it's important that we do, as a nation, look at how this issue was managed and to make sure that we are prepared for the next wave, because it certainly will be coming.
Yeah, thank you. Catherine.
Yeah, well, there is a review that's independent currently on foot. It's being carried out by a group assembled by WSU Chancellor Peter Shergold. I'm very proud that he's the Chancellor of my university, where I'm a professor, Western Sydney University, and it does exactly what we're all looking for, I think, which is reviewing independently and impartially how Australia responded to the COVID pandemic from all perspectives, from a scientific perspective, from a health perspective, from a rights and freedoms perspective, looking at the mental consequences of the sacrifices that we asked our younger Australians to make to keep the population safe, and looking at the appalling loss of life that occurred during the COVID pandemic. So absolutely a review is necessary, but one is already taking place, and I'm very, very interested and awaiting the results of that review.
Thank you. Heather?
A Royal Commission is a very expensive and long-term enterprise. Of course, its advantage is that it can force people to answer questions. There's a compulsion to do so, and penalties for not answering questions. So you might actually get some honest answers in that regard, rather than having the farce of the federal government refusing to send its bureaucrats along to be examined, as they did with regard to the Murray-Darling investigation. So I'm not sure whether a Royal Commission is necessary, but certainly we must have a review, because this has been a disgraceful mismanagement of public health. And it's really, I'm not sure that a Royal Commission is necessary to get to the bottom of the reasons why, but I nonetheless I do support a review, but I don't know that we need to go to the level of a Royal Commission.
Thank you, Heather. Trent?
Well, thank you. I firstly strongly disagree with Heather's last proposition. I think that Australia and New Zealand are the two countries in the world that have managed the health and economic consequences of the pandemic best. And that's reflected in the fact that whilst we've seen tragic deaths, the fact that we've avoided the type of mortality rates that we've seen in other parts of the world. We're now one of the most vaccinated populations in the world. We saw a significant ramp up of obviously our health capacity during the pandemic. We were rated number 2 by Johns Hopkins University for pandemic preparedness. And economically, obviously, the fact that our economy is bouncing back so strongly faster than any other advanced economy is a reflection of some of the economic policies that we had in place. So that's been the combined effort of federal government, state government, and frankly, most importantly, of all the citizenry of Australia in following the health advice that came from the federal and the state government. I think it is important that after any event like this that you have some form of inquiry. I don't know that royal commissions are always the answer. It really needs to be a scientific, technical inquiry more than anything else to see what lessons can be learnt. We're not out of the woods entirely yet. And of course, we still don't know what twists and turns COVID might have for us. We hope that Omicron is the last strain, and the future strains are mild and not more serious, but frankly, we just don't know. So let's hope that the normal path of a virus, a smart virus, to moderate its severity, but not necessarily its infectiousness, happens in this case. But yes, in due course, some type of review of any lessons that we need to learn would be worthwhile.
Thank you. And last but not least, Lesley.
Thanks. I think that, sorry, mental blank. Absolutely, this has been completely mismanaged. Human rights have been trampled on, and the suicide rate has been astronomical, even amongst the age group up to 6-year-olds. This is untenable. And now I find that a psychologist can't even give a Zoom consultation unless they've been injected. Well, I'm sorry, but we have an excess mortality of over 8,000 people in the last year. And not all of that can be accounted for by what they call COVID deaths. There have been an awful lot of deaths resulting from or after, if you like, having been injected. There needs to be a complete inquiry, scientific and medical, into the ingredients of the injection and the horrendous results that people have had to undergo. And there needs to be adequate compensation for the people who've been injured, because the injuries are just horrendous.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Look, I wish I could ask, there's so many more questions, but we can't get to them tonight. But I would just like to say thank you to everyone who joined the Zoom. I would like to say thank you to all the candidates. I think it's been a respectful discussion, and we've learnt more about what you've all standing for, and good luck for everyone on the 21st of May. And remember, everyone, vote early, but not often. And as I said, there's you can pre-poll as of today. Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate your time. Good luck, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Jackie.
Bye-bye.
Bye.